Tractate Nazir discusses the laws of the Nazarite vow. It's a bit of an extension of the prior tractate, the one dealing with the general laws of vows, and now discussing the Nazarite vow, a specific type of vow, which essentially vows against the consumption of wine, grapes, or any of their derivatives, against cutting hair, and against becoming ritually impure from a corpse. This vow can be taken for different period lengths, different terms, or for multiple terms, or as a permanent Nazir, and similar. It also discusses the wording of the vow to take upon yourself these prohibitions, and the ceremony that concludes somebody's Nazarite period. The first chapter begins by discussing the terminology to take upon yourself a Nazarite vow. The first Mishnah says, when taking this Nazarite vow, all equivalent terms for a Nazir can be used effectively in this vow. If somebody says, I shall be, without specifying anything after, that's a valid Nazarite oath. If somebody says, I shall be handsome, clearly referencing growing out his hair to be a Nazir, that's a valid Nazarite vow. Anyways, some equivalent terminologies for the term Nazir you can use instead. Someone could validly vow to be a Nazik, a Naziach, a Paziach. He could vow to be like this, to be Misalsil, to be Mechalkel, to grow trusses, and if he vows to do the bird obligation, it's debated if this is valid. The Gemara asks a bit of a broad question, which is that the Gemara is sorted by topic. The third topic, Tractate Yevames until Tractate Kiddushin, and those in between encompasses the order of Nashim, women, essentially dealing with the laws of marriage and similar. The question is asked, why is Tractate Nazir in the middle of this section? So it's explained that it's because there's also a discussion on the laws of marriage, particularly in the following tractate, of the laws of the Saita, an adulterous woman, and it's explained that people only do adultery when intoxicated. So it's said that people who see an adulterous woman during the temple ceremony should take upon themselves a Nazarite vow against wine, as they just saw the negative effects that intoxication can have on a person. So that's the context of the discussion being placed right over here. Another point, it has a similar discussion to the beginning of Tractate Nedarim, which is that the preface of the Mishnah was that it would be discussing equivalent terms of the vow, and then it mentioned partial declarations, and then after equivalent terms. Some say that you should just slot in a preface about partial declarations, and then it fully discusses those first, as they were most recently mentioned, which is something the Mishnah occasionally does, and it gives a number of examples. There are instances of the opposite occurring, but it says it really just could do either way. Others say it brings the basic formula first in the preface, and then it discusses the partial declarations first, as they're a scriptural exposition and not obvious, so they're stated before everything else. Anyways, one of the partial declarations was I shall be, which was said to be a valid Nazarite vow. According to some, this is explained to refer specifically to the fact that it works if there's an actual Nazir in front of him, as he's probably not referring to anything else, versus if he just said the phrase without any context, where it could refer to other types of vows also. It also teaches that this oral declaration is sufficient in this case. Additionally, the phrase I shall be handsome is said to be referring to where he's also touching his hair as he says this, so it's not in reference to anything else. It also asks how a Nazir can be referred to as handsome, as some refer to a Nazir as a sinner for taking such an oath, but that's explained to only be if they became impure and violate their Nazarite vow. When we said it's valid for him to say, I am hereby like this, again, this refers to where there's a Nazir in front of him. The terms misalsel and mechalkel are in reference to hair, and the source for the definitions are explained, and the cases, again, are where he's touching his hair as he makes the vow. It also explains the source for the definition of the word for trusses. The debate as to whether the vow with the obligation of the birds is based on if we think a person would vow by reference to something related to the thing he intends to vow to, in this case the Nazarite offering, which there's a reference towards hair and birds together in a verse from scripture. Others explain that it's whether he's vowing to bring the bird offering of an impure Nazir, and it's where a pure Nazir passed before him as he made this vow. There's a practical difference between these two opinions. If he said, an obligation of birds which are mentioned in relation to hair is upon me, according to the latter opinion, he'd still require an actual Nazir to pass in front of him while he says this for it to be valid. It further debates from several sources as to whether a vow using a word that relates to a different concept in scripture that he has in mind, if that has validity as a vow. New Mishnah. If somebody says, I am hereby a Nazir from grape seeds, or from grape skins, or from hair cutting, or from impurity, he is a full Nazir encompassing all of the prohibitions. The Gemara says, some actually disagree, saying he needs to vow against every one of the prohibitions for it to be a valid Nazarite vow, and it's debated based on verses. This is for the discussed. New Mishnah. If somebody vows to be like Samson, or like the son of Manoah, or like the husband of Delilah, or like him who tore out the gates of Gaza, or like him who the Philistines gouged his eyes out. He's a Samsonian Nazir, which is a special lifelong type of Nazarite vow. The Gemara says the point on mentioning all of these different ways of saying Samson is that in addition to vowing to be like Samson, the son of Manoach, that could in theory be in reference to somebody else, so you would need to say another of the identifying markers. New Mishnah, the difference between a permanent Nazir and a Samsonian Nazir is that a permanent Nazir can still lightly trim his hair if it grows too heavy, and he brings 3 animals as offerings when he does. If he becomes impure, he brings the same offering as a standard Nazir. A Samsonian Nazir can never even trim his hair, and if he becomes impure, he does not bring an offering. The Gemara says it should slot in an introductory preface as to the vow of a permanent Nazir. It also says that it's like the opinion that a Samsonian Nazir can become impure. It just says if he becomes impure here, as that's the context of the wording. It further disputes the source between opinions as to whether a Samsonian Nazir can become impure from several sources, including verses about Samson's killing of all the Philistines, as to whether he did so in a manner that he didn't contract ritual impurity or not. It says it's a tradition that he became impure, meaning it was permitted. It also cites sources that a permanent Nazir is allowed to trim his hair, as it says Avshalom, King David's son, was a permanent Nazir and he trimmed his hair, based on verses. It debates how often he cut his hair, which is based on different discussions. New Mishnah. The standard Nazarite period is 30 days. The Gemara cites sources for this from verses. Some count based on the verse that the Nazarite period is actually 29 days, and they'd say it says 30 here as he brings his offering and cuts his hair on the 30th day. This is further debated. The opinion is questioned based on further sources, and it's additionally discussed. New Mishnah. If somebody vows to be a Nazir for a large term, for a small term, or from now until the end of the world, his Nazarite period is for 30 days. The Gemara debates how this last term could only refer to 30 days. Some say it means he's saying it's for the 30-day period, but it's as long to him as if it were until the end of the world. It debates this point from a similar case where somebody vowed to be a Nazir until he reaches a location where it's a 30-day minimum and longer. It goes according to the distance of travel, it being the length of a single Nazarite vow, and not in reference to several consecutive 30-day terms. This is further discussed. Some simply say that the vow of the Mishnah was for one term, from here until the end of the world, hence it being only for 30 days. New Mishnah, if somebody says, I am a Nazir and 1 day, or a Nazir and 1 hour, or a Nazir 1.5, he is a Nazir for 2 terms. The Gemara explains that it needs all of these instances to show that in each of these cases the ruling is the same. New Mishnah. If somebody vows to be a Nazir for 30 days and an hour, he's a Nazir for 31 days, as there's no extension of a Nazirite vow by hours. The Gemara says, but if he said he's a Nazir for 30 days and 1 day, he would be a Nazir for 2 terms. It cites sources for this concept. If somebody says he's a Nazir as much as the hair on his head, or as the dust on the earth, or the sand by the sea, he's a permanent Nazir, and he cuts his hair once every 30 days. Others say a perpetual Nazir doesn't do that, it's only somebody who makes those types of vows. If somebody says he's a Nazir, a houseful, or a boxful, we ask his intent. If he said he meant one large Nazir period, he gets a 30-day period. If he said it was an unspecified amount, we treat the boxful he mentioned as if it was full of little seeds, and he's now a Nazir for the rest of his life. If somebody says he's a Nazir from here until a specific location, we calculate how long it would take to travel, and he's a Nazir for that number of days with a 30-day minimum. If somebody vows to be a Nazir as much as the number of days in the solar year, he has a Nazir term for each day of the solar year, so about 30 years. Somebody once did this, and they died. The Gemara says, in regards to viewing the boxhole as if it's filled with small things, that's one side of an argument. Others say we treat it more leniently, which is discussed. Therefore, the point I mentioned some rule differently if the word number is mentioned in the vow, along with a few miscellaneous points. It says if somebody says he's a permanent Nazir or similar, he's a permanent Nazir. But if he limits it, even saying he's a Nazir for 1,000 years, he's just a regular Nazir for that period. If somebody says he's a Nazir and 1, that's 2 Nazir periods. If he adds and more, that's 3. And if he adds and again, that's 4. Although it doesn't double with that one. It mentions some other terminologies you can add to lengthen your Nazirite period. And that's the end of chapter 1.